Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. People like you shouldn't waste our time. The words hung in the air like poison. The boutique fell silent, conversations halting mid-sentence as heads turned toward the young man in the wheelchair. His hands trembled slightly on the envelope containing every dollar he'd saved for 6 months. The sales consultant's smile remained perfectly in place, the kind reserved for people who didn't belong. The boutique gleamed under crystal chandeliers, glass display cases protecting timepieces worth more than most people's cars. David had researched for weeks, calculating exactly how much he needed for the most modest watch in the collection, a gift for the father who had sacrificed everything for him after the accident. The leather envelope in his hands represented overtime shifts at the call center, skipped lunches, and canceled subscriptions. What David couldn't see was the man who had been examining watches at the next counter. Dressed in casual jeans and a dark sweater with a baseball cap pulled low, he wouldn't have registered as important to the consultant who was now suggesting that perhaps a department store might be more appropriate for your budget situation. But the customers who recognized Leonardo DiCaprio beneath the casual disguise watched in growing interest as he slowly put down the luxury timepiece he'd been considering and turned his attention to the unfolding scene. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and
David
swallowed
stay with us.
hard,
Subscribe
his
now.
throat tightening as the consultant's words registered. He'd practiced this moment for weeks, walking into the boutique, asking for the specific model, counting out the exact amount. The reality was crushing him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Not just the consultant's dismissal, but the expressions on the other customers' faces. Some embarrassed for him, others enjoying the spectacle, a few pointedly looking away. The weight of his wheelchair suddenly felt heavier, the scars from the car accident that had taken his mobility at 16 burning beneath his clothes. "I've saved $1,875, David said, voice steadier than he expected. "The Celestia Basic model is listed at $1,850 on your website." He pulled out a printed page from his envelope. "I called last week to confirm it was in stock." The consultant's expression shifted from dismissal to something worse, condescension wrapped in synthetic patience. Behind them, a couple whispered and laughed softly, making no effort to hide their amusement at what they clearly saw as a futile exercise. David felt his cheeks burning but kept his eyes locked on the consultant's, refusing to let 6 months of sacrifice dissolve in embarrassment. "The Celestia collection," the consultant began, emphasizing each syllable as though speaking to a child, "represents our boutique's commitment to excellence and tradition. While the basic model is indeed our entry point, you must understand that ownership extends beyond mere purchase." His manicured hand brushed invisible dust from his lapel. "Our clients maintain relationships with our service department, attend exclusive events. The total investment is considerably more than the initial price." His gaze flicked meaningfully to David's worn jacket, the scuffed wheelchair. Several phones were out now, recording discreetly. Social media fodder, the kind that would spread with cruelly clever captions. The consultant grew more theatrical, playing to his audience. "Perhaps I could show you our catalog? You could save up for something more realistic?" He reached beneath the counter, pulling out not the prestigious catalog given to serious customers, but a thin pamphlet of clearance items. The boutique's background music seemed to fade as the humiliation crystallized. David's fingers crumpled the edge of his envelope, the dreams of seeing his father's face when he opened the gift box beginning to slip away like water through fingers. What none of them noticed was Leonardo DiCaprio's expression changing as he observed the scene. The Academy Award winner had perfected the art of blending into backgrounds when needed, of becoming just another face in exclusive spaces. But something in David's dignity, in the careful way he'd prepared his purchase down to the printed confirmation, struck a chord. Leo had played characters from all walks of life, but the authenticity in this moment, the raw human drama unfolding without script or direction, held a truth that Hollywood rarely captured. A boutique employee approached Leo with practiced deference, ready to usher him to the private viewing room typically reserved for celebrities. Leo raised his hand slightly, declining the special treatment with a subtle headshake. The contrast was stark, unsolicited reverence for him while David fought for basic respect with cash in hand. The consultant was now explaining the heritage and craftsmanship of their timepieces to David with exaggerated patience, clearly hoping he would give up and leave. The young man's composure was beginning to crack, his eyes lowering slightly, shoulders slumping forward as the weight of public humiliation pressed down. It was the exact moment Leonardo had seen countless times in scripts, the turning point where intervention would change everything. He set down his coffee, adjusted his cap, and began moving toward David's counter. Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. The Celestia Basic model, Leonardo said, his voice carrying that distinctive quality millions recognized from films, is actually an excellent choice. The consultant's head snapped up, recognition dawning in his eyes as Leo approached. David turned his wheelchair slightly, confusion crossing his face as the actor came to stand beside him. It's understated, reliable, Leo continued, gesturing toward the case where the watch in question was displayed. The kind of piece that speaks to character rather than flash. The atmosphere in the boutique transformed instantly. Phones raised higher, no longer hiding the recording. The consultant's face performed an astonishing evolution, from condescension to shock to a desperate, fawning smile. Mr. DiCaprio, what an unexpected honor. We would be delighted to assist you in our private viewing room. His hand moved instinctively toward a different door, one David would never have been shown. I'm good right here, Leo replied, the casual firmness in his voice leaving no room for negotiation. He turned to David, extending his hand. I'm Leo. The simplicity of the introduction stood in stark contrast to the extravagance surrounding them. David hesitated, then shook it, his eyes wide with recognition but voice steady when he replied, David Cooper. The consultant hovered awkwardly, trapped between the possibility of a celebrity sale and the disruption of his carefully maintained social hierarchy. Customers who had been pretending not to watch were now openly staring, the boutique's usual hushed atmosphere crackling with tension. David was asking about the Celestia Basic, Leonardo said to the consultant, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of steel. I believe he mentioned he's already confirmed it's in stock? The consultant nodded mechanically, caught in the surreal position of being held accountable by an A-list celebrity. It is, yes, of course, though perhaps Mr. Cooper might prefer. Leo cut him off with a raised hand. Why don't you bring it out so David can take a look? He's already done his research. The instruction, delivered with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, left no room for argument. As the consultant hurried away, Leo turned back to David. Birthday gift? He asked, nodding at the envelope. The normalcy of the question seemed to break through David's shock. For my dad, he answered, voice growing stronger. His 50th next week. He's worked the same factory job for 30 years. Never missed a day, even after Mom left and my accident. The words tumbled out, unplanned. He wears this old Timex that keeps stopping. Always says he'll get it fixed next month, but spends the money on my medical bills instead. Leo listened, really listened the way he did when preparing for a role, absorbing the human truth beneath the words. The other customers who had been smirking earlier now looked uncomfortable, suddenly forced to see David as a person with a story rather than an object of derision. The consultant returned, placing a watch case on the counter with exaggerated care, his entire demeanor transformed. "The Celestia Basic Model, as requested," he announced, looking at Leo for approval rather than at David, the actual customer. "Thank you," Leo said pointedly, stepping back to give David space at the counter. "I think David should be the one to open it." The consultant hesitated, then slid the case toward David, who carefully opened it to reveal a classic timepiece with a midnight blue face. Simple, elegant, without the flashy complications of the boutique's showcase pieces, but beautiful in its restraint. David's face softened as he looked at it, fingers hovering just above the glass as though afraid to touch it. "Your father sounds like the kind of man who deserves something that'll last," Leo commented, the genuine respect in his voice a stark contrast to the consultant's earlier condescension. 30 years at the same job. That's the kind of commitment people don't understand anymore. Several onlookers shifted uncomfortably, the commentary cutting closer to home than they'd expected from a celebrity encounter. "May I?" Leo asked, gesturing to the watch. When David nodded, he lifted it carefully, examining the craftsmanship with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Solid movement, classic design. This will still look good 30 years from now." He handed it to David, who held it with reverent care. The consultant, desperate to regain control of the situation, rushed in with practiced salesmanship. "Mr. DiCaprio has excellent taste. Perhaps I could interest either of you in something from our premium collection. We just received several pieces that haven't even been displayed yet." The moment hung in the air, the consultant trying to pivot to a larger sale, the customers watching to see if Leo would abandon David for the VIP treatment, David himself still holding the watch that represented months of sacrifice. Leo's expression changed subtly, the kind of micro-expression directors caught in close-ups, something between disappointment and resolve. He turned to the consultant with the full force of his attention. "I think you're missing something important here. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk." The consultant's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Mr. DiCaprio?" Leo gestured toward David, who was still holding the watch with care that spoke of its importance to him. "David didn't come in here looking for a bargain or a status symbol. He came with exact change for a specific watch that means something." Leo's voice remained conversational, but something had shifted. The same intensity he brought to his most powerful scenes now focused entirely on this moment. He didn't walk in expecting special treatment or recognition. He just wanted to be treated with basic dignity while making a purchase he saved for. The boutique had gone completely silent. Every phone was recording, every eye fixed on the scene. The consultant swallowed hard, his professional veneer cracking under the weight of what was unfolding. "Of course, we value all our customers." Leo cut him off with a slight shake of his head. "Do you? Because from what I saw, you judged him the moment he rolled through that door. Before he even spoke, you decided what he was worth." David looked up from the watch, his expression a complex mixture of gratitude and discomfort at being the center of this unexpected drama. But beneath that was something more powerful, the restoration of dignity that had been stripped away. Leo continued, each word measured and clear. "I've played characters who judged people by appearances. They were never the heroes of those stories." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience, quickly silenced as Leo went on. In fact, they were usually cautionary tales. The consultant's face had drained of color, the realization dawning that this moment, captured on dozens of phones, could end his career. "Mr. DiCaprio, please understand that we have certain protocols for different types of—" He stopped abruptly, hearing his own words. Different types. The admission hung in the air, damning in its honesty. Leo raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch, a technique he'd mastered through years of powerful performances. Knowing when not speaking carried more weight than any dialogue. "I just want to buy the watch," David said quietly, breaking the tension. "For my dad." The simplicity of the statement cut through the artifice of the entire situation. Leo nodded, turning back to the consultant. "David has $1,875 for a watch listed at $1,850. I'd say that makes him exactly the right type of customer." There was no anger in his voice, just a calm certainty that made the rebuke all the more powerful. "So why don't you complete his purchase with the same respect you'd show anyone else?" A manager had appeared, alerted by staff to the situation unfolding. She approached with the practiced smoothness of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Mr. DiCaprio, David, I'm Elaine Carter, the boutique director. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding." Her eyes darted nervously to the phone still recording. "We value every customer who appreciates fine timepieces." She shot a pointed look at the consultant, who stepped back, effectively dismissed. "Please, allow me to handle this transaction myself." She turned to David with a warm smile that, despite the circumstances, appeared genuine. "And we would be honored to provide complimentary gift wrapping for your father's present." David carefully counted out his money, bills that were worn but neatly arranged in denominational order. Each one represented hours of work, small sacrifices accumulated over months. When he placed the final dollar on the counter, there was a peculiar dignity to the moment that even the wealthiest customers in the boutique seemed to recognize. One by one, phones lowered slightly, recording continuing but with a newfound respect for what they were witnessing. As the manager processed the sale, Leonardo leaned against the counter beside David. "You know," he said conversationally, "I've played all kinds of characters, but the ones that stay with me are the ones who value something beyond themselves. Your dad's going to appreciate that watch not because of what it cost, but because of who it came from and the thought behind it." He smiled slightly. "That's the kind of wealth that doesn't depreciate." The manager returned with the watch, now nestled in a sleek blue box with the boutique's logo embossed in silver. "We've included a 3-year extended warranty," she said, sliding the package toward David. "Compliments of the house." She handed him the receipt, where the $1,850 price was now marked down to $1,800. "And a small adjustment to the price. Our current promotion. The $75 change would be returned to him, a small fortune in David's careful accounting of every dollar." As David accepted the change and the elegantly wrapped package, something shifted in the atmosphere of the boutique. The customers who had been watching with idle amusement or discomfort were now seeing the conclusion of a story that had unexpectedly moved many of them. Several were quietly putting away their wallets, the expensive purchases they'd been considering suddenly seeming less important. The consultant who had dismissed David stood at the far end of the showroom, watching his career implode in real time as video of the encounter undoubtedly spread across social media platforms. "It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it." "Thank you," David said, looking directly at Leonardo, the simple words carrying the weight of everything that had transpired. The actor nodded, understanding the depth behind the thanks, not just for the intervention, but for the restoration of dignity in a moment that could have gone very differently. "Your father raised someone who knows the value of things," Leo replied. "That's worth respecting." He glanced around the boutique, where customers were pretending to browse while still watching the interaction. Some people spend their whole lives without figuring that out. The manager, seizing the opportunity to salvage the boutique's reputation, stepped forward. "Mr. Cooper, please know that you and your father are always welcome here. Our service department will be available whenever you need assistance with the timepiece." Her words were directed at David, but pitched to be heard by everyone recording. The damage control was obvious, but not entirely insincere. Her eyes held genuine regret for how David had been treated initially. As David tucked the package carefully into a side pocket of his wheelchair, Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "If your dad's a film buff, tell him to reach out. I'd love to hear what he thinks of the watch." He handed the card to David, who accepted it with visible surprise. It wasn't a public relations move. The card was personal, handwritten with a private number. A small gesture that acknowledged the human connection that had formed unexpectedly in this temple of luxury. Outside the boutique, a small crowd had gathered, word spreading through the high-end shopping district that Leonardo DiCaprio was inside. As David navigated his wheelchair toward the exit, Leo walked alongside him, ignoring the flashes of cameras from paparazzi who had inevitably arrived. "Mind if I walk out with you?" he asked, the casual question belying its significance. David nodded, a smile breaking through the emotional weight of the past hour. They emerged together into the late afternoon sunlight, the contrast striking. One of Hollywood's most recognizable stars and a young man in a wheelchair who, an hour earlier, had been deemed unworthy of service. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would soon circulate worldwide, with headlines crafting various narratives around what had transpired. But the truth of what happened inside would spread faster through the videos taken by boutique customers, the authentic interaction that couldn't be scripted or staged. "My dad's not going to believe this," David said as they paused at the curb. Leo laughed, the sound genuine. "Tell him I said happy birthday." He hesitated, then added with characteristic thoughtfulness, "And tell him he did something right, raising a son who understands that the price of something isn't the same as its value." The words weren't performative. They carried the weight of someone who had navigated a world where worth was constantly confused with wealth. By evening, the videos had gone viral. "Respect Isn't Optional" trended across platforms, with millions sharing the clips of Leonardo DiCaprio defending David against the boutique's classism. Media outlets ran headlines ranging from DiCaprio's real-life hero moment to deeper analyses of accessibility and discrimination in luxury spaces. The boutique issued a formal apology, announcing donations to disability advocacy organizations and mandatory staff training. The consultant was no longer with the company, according to their statement. But beyond the viral moment and corporate damage control, something more meaningful had occurred. In living rooms and on smartphones across the world, people watched a simple truth play out. That dignity shouldn't be determined by dollars, that worth isn't measured by wealth. Parents showed the video to their children, discussing what it meant to judge someone based on appearance. Discussions emerged about accessibility, about the small indignities faced daily by those society often overlooks. In a modest home across town, David presented the watch to his father, along with a story he would never have believed had it not been captured from a dozen angles. As his father opened the box, his weathered hands trembling slightly at the sight of the timepiece he would never have purchased for himself. The true value of the gift was clear, not in its price tag, but in the love behind it. And on his wrist, it would tell more than time. It would tell the story of a son's devotion and an unexpected moment when one of Hollywood's biggest stars reminded the world that true character isn't about the roles you play on screen, but how you treat others when you think no one important is watching. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, Imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.